Hello, welcome back to another edition of the Fundraisers podcast, where we bring you the voice, the wisdom from all the best fundraisers from around the world. And guess who I've got on the show today? I've got Menka Sajnani. How are you doing, Menka?
I'm doing
Good.
great. I actually just had my first experience with COVID.
Yeah, I was going to say, look, I caught up with you, what was it, like 2 months ago, and asked you to come on the show after Mike Lids came, right? And Mike was like, you have to get Menka. And I was like, okay, let's go and talk to Menka, right? And then you were moving house, changing jobs.
Exactly.
What's happened?
A lot has been going on personally, but the latest was COVID, and the whole family got it. So that included
What, everybody?
my mom, who's nearly 70. I think the baby had it too, but she only had it for like a day, and the rest of us were dying.
Oh, no.
But anyway, it was our first time. So I think a lot of people have had it for the second or third time.
I was a
so
bit
it's just
surprised when you
easier.
told me. You're like,
Yeah. So we've
only
escaped it
just
so
got it?
far, but I think this happened to the whole of Singapore and the industry. Whoever went to the super returns and subsequently Milken got COVID. Like,
That's it.
a lot of people got COVID. So, but anyway, now I feel like Superwoman because I feel like I'm immune to everything, and I'm walking around without my mask, and I'm like, this is done. And I'm ready to
that's
move on.
amazing. So like I got it like 9 months ago, so I'm probably due to get one anytime. So let's hope it doesn't come soon. But anyway, so look, I woke up this morning, I was like, right, Menka's coming on the show, and I have to figure out something to start or break the ice with. So I thought, let me Google her. And I Googled, and I came across this article that you wrote in 2020 about The Last Dance or something it was called, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, there was that one line in there where you said something about your father. And he said something like, oh, if you're successful at that one time, then you're only successful for that one time and you can't repeat it. I thought it was a really well-written piece, man. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what was that like? Tell me about that.
I was watching the show with my husband. It was one of those Netflix evenings, and I was just obsessed. I mean, you've seen it? Have you seen it?
I don't follow NBA, but I obviously like Michael Jordan.
Yes.
I'm obviously quite a big fan.
Yes. But yeah, it just had such a huge impact on me. And I think, some of the stuff resonated, right?
That part that, you wrote where it's about teamwork and like camaraderie, and then you come together and you gotta work together, right? Like, so when he started passing the ball around, then he started scoring loads of goals.
Exactly.
Right? That was the thing.
And I think that part that you mentioned earlier, that success is, a one-time thing. You have to continually improve yourself. I think that's the motto that I live by, and I want to live by, because I do think that being successful in one fundraise doesn't mean you're going to be successful in the next. It's always really, really hard, and people in the fundraising business will know this. And so I think it's important to stay humble and obviously continually work on yourself and your art.
It's certainly a feast and famine roller coaster, the fundraising world, right? And you've seen your fair share of that, right? I mean, it's really difficult. I really admire when I meet a good fundraiser and they've got all these success stories, but also war stories, right?
Yeah.
But I also find that every time I meet a good fundraiser, I also know that there were early stories in their early life that kind of shaped who they are today, right? For example, like, it sounds like, you come from when we met for coffee, obviously you come from a very business-minded family, right? So that must have trained you for this, right? For some others who probably didn't, who probably don't have that background, probably. Does that give you the edge, do you feel? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think two things, right? I think one is, as you correctly pointed out, I come from a business community, if you will, and it's known as what it's referred to as a Sindhi community.
Yes.
And Sindhis are an interesting people. We were exiled from India during partition, so we kind of had to leave everything behind and restart and kind of build something from nothing. So you'll find us everywhere. You'll find the community. You'll find us in Curacao. You'll find us in Peru. You'll find us in Hong Kong, Singapore, all over the world. Right. And, we're known to be very successful at building businesses. And they often joke about it. You'll never find a poor Sindhi. It's a very flamboyant community. We love money.
Yeah.
We enjoy making money. We enjoy the grit, the hustle of, starting something new. And I might be the only amongst most of my friends at home in Hong Kong that's not an entrepreneur yet.
Wow.
You know, even when I meet a housewife, like my friend who's a housewife, she'll have like 6 side hustles, right? She'll be distributing. She'll have a wine distribution business on the side. And I'm like, you know, it's just how we are wired in the DNA. And I think it's that grit, that hustle, that love for money,
yes,
that enjoyment for being around money, I guess is probably what attracted me to a fundraising career and you know, shape that in some way. And secondly, and I think it's about having been a former LP for so long. I started my journey in the business 15 years ago. And the first 7 years, you know, when I was 24, suddenly I found myself in the LP world, making decisions around which GPs to commit capital to. It was very humbling because at 24, you have really smart, you have really smart people walk into your office and say, would you like to invest in my fund? It really, I'm really grateful and fortunate to have had that experience. But I think having that LP DNA, understanding what resonates with an LP, when I sit across the table from an LP, I feel like I'm talking to someone of my own kind, like my own brethren, because I've been there. I know what they go through when they're thinking through, can I take this fund across my investment committee? How am I going to convince them? How am I going to convince my IC members to invest in a Southeast Asia fund? I think that definitely gave me an edge as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So you started your career sort of, what was it, Merger Group, was it?
It's a group called Merger Market.
Merger Market, that's it,
Yes, it
sorry.
was acquired by Financial Times and then part of Pearson, and I think it was private equity backed, financial intelligence company.
Yeah. And then how did you make that move into HQ Capital, which is like more private equity fund LP, right? Because being a recruiter, I know that when LPs or fund of funds look for an associate, they will say, hey, let's go get this guy from investment banking, or we'll go, you know, to a consulting firm perhaps, or whatever. But then, you know, how did you pull that off?
That's a good question, and it brings back a lot of memories. I think being, you know, I went to a liberal arts school in the US, and the one thing that I learned was it was multidisciplinary, right? I had to study everything from calculus to economics to Aristotle but my major was communications. So I think I was a very good writer. So I saw a newspaper cutting for a role, very old school, an associate role to focus on India and Southeast Asia. And then the South China Morning Post in Hong Kong, and I thought, what is this fund of funds, private equity? Sounds cool. So I read up about it, and I wrote a really great cover letter about how I'm Indian. I grew up in Hong Kong, and, you know, I believe in the India growth story, and, you know, I would love to kind of learn about investing in India, and, you know, I think there's a lot of opportunity, blah, blah, blah. And so interestingly enough, my boss, who ended up hiring me, called me for the interview, and I remember he told me to go home and said, you're not a good fit, because, I didn't have the background.
Right, yes.
And said, you should go consider going and, you know, doing an MBA. And then, you know, I love him to bits. He's still my mentor today. So anyway, 3 months later, I heard from him again. And his assistant called up and said, would you be available to meet him for a coffee? And I said, sure. And I went in my jeans, you know, in my casual attire, thinking it's just a coffee, right? Like, I didn't know he's going to be, you know, interviewing me again or offering me a role, but he offered me a role. Wow. And he said, you know, I interviewed about 40 people. I think you have great communication skills. I think I can mold you. I think you can learn. So he took a punt on me. Yeah. But what I found out later is that the person he wanted to hire was way above his budget. And he didn't have a very high budget. So he was like, let me hire someone young and, you know, well-meaning, somebody who really is hungry and wants to learn.
That classic chestnut.
And see where it goes. And I ended up being there for 7 years.
Amazing, yeah. Well, you did a fantastic job there. It was like a few years, right? 6, 7 years. What did you say?
Yeah, almost 7 years. And I was on a great career track. Got promoted a bunch of times. Had a great life. I mean, the LP life it's a great life. It's busy.
Yeah. Tell me about the LP life. What was it like?
I mean, I think to be mixing and interacting with the best brains of the world on a daily basis it was probably the biggest privilege I've ever had. And so that was one of the reasons when I kind of made that career transition. I made a career transition in 2014. I decided to quit and move to the tech world, and I joined Google in a sales role.
Yeah.
I missed the investment fraternity because I was like, and Google's full of smart people.
Yes.
But I still missed the investment fraternity because I'm like, I was part of something very special. Because, we're building economies, we're building sectors, we're creating jobs. I mean, we're doing something really fundamental. So I wanted to come back, and that's when, I thought about what I wanted to do, and I figured I didn't want to be on the LP side because I did feel like, in some sense, I was 1 or 2 steps removed from the action, but being on the GP side would be kind of cool. So then I thought, why don't I do a role which allows me to tap into my network and the understanding of sort of the institutional investor. And so I thought maybe a fundraising role would be interesting. And again, to my thanks to my I guess my wonderful luck, Amit from Jungle took a punt on me, and he said, you've never done fundraising before, but you have a background, and we're institutionalizing the firm. You understand LPs. Why don't you come on board and we'll try this out? And that journey lasted 4 years, and it was the beginning of my fundraising career.
Amazing. Yes.
Yeah.
So some of the key takeaways, let's say if you look at your LP life, right, and then your GP life, right, what would you think would be the key takeaways that you've picked up along the way on those two very different career journeys, right? If somebody else wants to get into it or wants to build a career in the LP world or is doing a role similar to yours, like the one that you had at HQ Capital, what are the key takeaways that you could pass on to somebody? Say, hey, do this, but don't do this. But this, you know what I mean? And then, what would you say? Any good takeaways?
Maybe it might be more interesting, not that I don't want to answer the LP question, but would it be interesting if I answer sort of the fundraising career?
Yeah,
because
up to you, yes.
And personally, I feel very passionate about it. I absolutely love what I do. I think you can tell in the conversations we've had. I think it's, as a career, it's really exciting. Everybody wants to get into the investment space. And I think you can't build a fund if you don't know how to fundraise. So it's an equally important skill, if not more, to cultivate. So whenever I talk to kids who are like, I want to get into private equity and venture, I'm like, you should consider fundraising or investor relations. It's a growing space. There are very few good IR and fundraising professionals in Asia. Fund management is growing like no one's business. There's lots of opportunity. That's number one. But you need to be thick-skinned.
Yeah.
I think at some level, it takes time. It takes time to build and convert relationships, and I think you need to be thick-skinned, and it makes you strong, definitely. I think in terms of key takeaways, when I look back at my 7-year career in fundraising, and we have raised a lot, I haven't taken any break until now, is I'm in some sense the antithesis to what people believe would be a classic fundraiser, because I don't believe in going to every conference in the world. I don't believe in collecting 1,000 business cards every year and like networking and knowing everybody and going to every party and every cocktail. I think for me, it wouldn't work as a fundraising strategy. I mean, I believe in deep relationships. I believe in quality versus quantity, and that formula has always worked for me. Any fundraise that I've done, I've contacted or engaged with no more than 50, 60 LPs, and that's worked for me. So I genuinely believe in fostering, deep relationships, understanding the people that you want to build a relationship with, and figuring out where the gaps are, and just staying focused. I guess also partly because of my personality, I'm all in or nothing person. So I can't have too much going on, too many events. I need to put my head down and focus on what I already have and deepen that. So I think that's a key learning. The second one would be probably around follow-up. Everyone talks about the science of the follow-up, but I do think that it's following up, but it's also how you follow up with the LP, how you follow up with the prospect. You will know this, in your business. It's how you engage, what information you provide, how you handle objections,
Yeah.
all of that is an art and a science. So I think the how and mastering the how is still something I'm learning to do.
Wow.
And growing it. Yeah.
Hey, so that's really interesting. Look, in sales, at least in my world, we have the 7 steps, right?
Yes.
So similar to what you said. So you make sure you're talking to the right person, which I guess in your world would be like make sure you're talking to the right LP, right? Somebody who's going to willing to invest, right? Then you got to build rapport. I think that goes back to your relationship point, which is step 2. Step 3 goes into sort of qualifying what the person actually wants, and then step 4 is the presentation. Step 5 is the handling objection part. Step 6 is close, and 7 is get a referral. so we follow this, and I think most salespeople can articulate something similar to that for their process. Well, you've just articulated your sales process in a very summarized way, right? So, but very interesting, you just said like your formula is inch wide, mile deep, right? That's it. And that served you well, hasn't it? Like,
yeah.
So I mean, and you've done very well with that.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, and I stand by it. I live by it.
So what would be how would you, if you were sitting in front of a coffee table or dinner, right, with somebody who was the opposite to you and had immense success in it, that would be an interesting conversation, right? Because I'm sure there's both things you can work.
Exactly. I would love to learn from that person. How do you do it? How do you do it?
Because I've seen that they're going to come back with the Rolodex, and then they're like, "Oh, I know everybody globally."
Yeah,
but like, is it possible? Like, based on your experience, is it actually possible to have a very successful fundraising career by saying that you're a global fundraiser? Or is that just almost impossible, given the fact that what you just said, you have to build good relationships with these people, right? And how are you going to do it when there's like thousands and thousands of LPs all over the world?
Yeah.
So it's an interesting one, isn't it?
I mean, I think, that's an interesting one. At Jungle, I had more of a global role.
Really?
I was looking at the US and Europe and Asia, whereas in B Capital, it was much more focused on, and it was pretty much Asia and the Middle East. I helped selectively with some clients in the US and in Europe, but wow, I mean, I think looking back, I think I was very fortunate that when I joined Jungle, we were pretty much done raising our second fund, and we were going to launch the third fund only a year and a half, 2 years later. So I had plenty of time to build that pipeline. And then, first what we did was classic, right? You go broad, you talk to everybody. Yeah. And then, 1 year down the line, you build the funnel. Then you're like, okay, who are the warm guys? Who are the guys that are actually going to, it was still early for Southeast Asia. Back in the day when we were raising Jungle Fund 3, it was we still had to convert people to believe us. We were still selling Southeast Asia. I think today people have bought into Southeast Asia a lot more and have to be convinced about the GP. I think back in the day there was still a lot of education and converting people. So it's a process, and I don't know how to answer your question in the best way possible. But the approach that I took was definitely, I mean, as you said very correctly, a lot of, referrals was how I went about it. I think that's the most powerful way, personally, that I've got credibility and been able to win over clients. Yeah.
Well, what about like if I asked you another question and said, okay, when you first got into fundraising, obviously you came out from the LP side and you went into Jungle, right? And then obviously you have never done that role. You've always been on the opposite side of the table. Now you're having to do it, right? Were there any things like that, sort of like mistakes that you were making early on that you wish like, I could really go back and actually, like, if there's another junior person in the market who's hitting the pavements right now, don't make these mistakes. I've been there, done that, doesn't work.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice there for anyone?
Yeah, I mean, now looking back, I've got 7 years worth of data and, experience to look back at. I would say that it would be product development. Is getting your, one is knowing the LP, but the other is, knowing yourself and being able to articulate your narrative And that's product development to me. It's like, who are you? What is your strategy? Is it clear? Is it aligned to what you've done with the past? Is it consistent? How do you demonstrate that, in a pitch? And so I think I would personally, let's say I go and set up my own fund, I would probably talk to a few close LPs and kind of share my vision and share my strategy.
Right.
And then take the feedback. And that doesn't mean if, I'm going to go and change my strategy because LP doesn't think it's going to sell or they never invest. But maybe that means I re-articulate it, or I kind of reposition it, or I tweak it. And so I think that product development phase before you go out to market is absolutely critical. Before you go and build that final version of the deck, the final version of the data room, there's lots of things that you need to be, prepared to answer and be very clear about and make sure that, your audience will resonate. And I think that homework is something that, I'm getting better and better at doing as I grow, as a professional, I guess.
Interesting. I like that analogy. Wow, I like it. Product development.
Yeah, it is product development.
That is basically what sales is about, and that's how you manage the whole thing, is to make sure it's not a product, but it's what comes out of your mouth, right? So you got to make sure that it's what it makes sense, and it's what clients actually want, right?
Yes.
As well. And so really cleverly put. So Menka, I want to double click on that. So how has your approach to LPs changed over time?
No, I don't know if it's changed per se, but I think it's been refined over time. And, I think fundraising is a balance between art and science.
Yes.
I've been, and I think I've mentioned this, I've been extremely fortunate in my life in general, but, just being in this industry and, worked with incredible people. I worked with, as I mentioned earlier, I worked with Amit from Jungle, and then, Raj from B Capital, side by side, and learned a lot from them. And, stylistically very different, but both absolutely incredible at what they do. So I think over time, as I kind of refine how I do what I do, I'd say, at some point I was really good at the art, but not very good at the process.
Yes.
It's all about the narrative, the storytelling, and, all of that, and the relationship. And then, over time, I had to train myself to learn about process, like having the perfectly looking pitch deck with the perfect fonts, and, having the sales process that we just talked about earlier, and getting better at that process as well. So I think it's been refined over time, and I'm very lucky and fortunate to have worked with two individuals that I learned a lot from.
Okay, so since we're talking about pitches, right, I'm going to put you on the spot. Who do you think was the most memorable pitch you've ever been involved in as an LP? So you got a GP that comes to you and you're just like, wow, that was really solid.
Gosh, that's so hard because, I probably screened at least in my 7-year career, easily 300 to 400, if not more, fund managers, right? Because, private equity began to take off really in 2007, 2008, and since then, the number of new GPs coming to market just keeps growing. So, wow, so many good ones. Okay, I would personally say that my favorite investor that I think very highly of, probably was also the best at, articulating his strategy, and, was pretty inspiring, at least to me, is a gentleman by the name of Ashish Dhawan from Chris Capital.
Oh, okay.
It's one of the most well-known private equity funds in India. He did very well for himself.
Right.
We invested in probably every single one of his funds. They're well known because, they returned capital back to LPs, which is not very common in India.
Right.
Wasn't, at least in the private equity space at the time. So great track record, strong track record, very authentic style. And I think today, if I remember correctly, he runs an education foundation. He retired in his 40s and gave it to his partners, and now is doing good for the world. So just truly a great human being.
Yeah.
And I think, because I guess he was what he said and what he did was aligned, that's probably what worked for me, and that's probably what checked the boxes for me.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, was there anything like how he delivered it? Was it just like just always amazing talker, or was it just the way the whole thing was packaged? Was product development was a bit amazing, right?
I think the packaging was definitely very good. It was very good, very polished, very structured, very clear.
Another thing that I wanted to ask you is, like, you must have been on a lot of AGMs as well, right? How were they? Like, have you got any cool stories that you can remember? Any most memorable AGM that you've been on?
I won't take names, but there was an AGM that I went to, and it'll always stick with me because it was the best, probably one of the best weeks of my life, and we basically had the opportunity to go to private parties with famous cricket players like Sachin Tendulkar, and like had this GP arranged for us to hang out with King Khan, who is Mr. Shah Rukh Khan himself, and it was just crazy. It was unreal. I was like, I can't believe I'm at an AGM. Stuff like that. I mean, it didn't happen all the time.
Yeah, okay.
But when it did, you're like, wow, I sit in a really privileged position. I'm really lucky to be where I am.
Were they like LPs in the fund, or they were just there as directors?
I think they were there because they were friends of this GP.
Right. I see.
That's not why we invested, but we had invested a lot before that, but it was a nice surprise.
All right. So I wanted to ask you next, would you ever go back to the LP side?
Wow, that's a good question. I absolutely love what I do, so I don't see myself making that change. It's very, very unlikely.
Really?
Yeah, probably I enjoy pain. I enjoy pain. I like being in the fundraising world. It's tough and it beats you up at times, but yeah, I truly enjoy what I do.
Menka, how do you stay so humble? You're obviously very successful, right? You've done a lot, and obviously most salespeople, when they've reached this kind of level of success, they can boast a bit, but you haven't really demonstrated any sign of that. You've been very sort of down to earth, and so how do you do that?
First of all, it's very nice of you to say that. I don't think I've reached anywhere. I have so much more to do. That's what I always tell myself. That's probably what keeps me in check. Yeah, I have so much. I have
answer.
so much to do.
Okay, so look, everybody has insecurities. I'm sure you have some, right? I've got my own, and you've got yours, and I think it would be lovely to hear, at least to make this sound more normal. So, what are some of your insecurities or fears that you've sort of battling away with?
I just hit my 40s, so there's always like, oh, what are the next 10, 15 years going to look like? How is my professional journey going to pan out? What am I going to do that's going to, take it to the next level for me, for my family? Am I going to have autonomy? Am I going to continue to love what I do? I mean, all these questions, right? That anxiety around the next 10, 15 years. I also just became a mom. So, there's that thing about balancing family and obviously your professional life. So definitely some anxiety and insecurity there. Yeah. And obviously you're Cindy in a family full of business people. They're probably expecting you to set up your own business by now. Who knows? I'm still kind of figuring out. So yeah, still on the journey, right? I mean, so every salesperson or every fundraiser has to stay focused. Right. Do you have any sort of advice around that? I mean, how do you do it? Whether it's at work or in personal life, like how do you stay focused and in your lane? I know I've said this throughout the session, but I think it's similar to you. If you love what you do, it just naturally, you're so zoned into it. You're just like so into it. So that allows me to have the focus. Because I think if I kind of liked what I did, I wouldn't be focused. I wouldn't be able to focus. I wouldn't have the drive. I totally agree with you, man. Yeah. I mean, I'm exactly the same. When you do what you find, like almost like it's like your purpose, right? It's like your
your ikigai, as they say, right? Like this is the thing that you really enjoy, then it doesn't look like you're actually working, even if you're doing OT or whatever. Like you're just doing your job, right? And I think that's something that I think you got to love. So I think some people walk into the fundraising world, they sort of gone into investments, they fall into fundraising, and they don't actually really enjoy it.
Yeah.
Most of them, they want to go back into investments.
Yeah.
And I always found that there's a marzipan layer, like, this really thin group of people that actually really enjoy it. Like you said, they enjoy the pain, right? And pain is good, right? As they say. And I think they really enjoy the way that whole process works, and and getting those LPs over the line. Well, thank you for coming on the show. Look, it's been really, really a pleasure to have you here. Is there any question I should have asked that I could have asked that I didn't, that you would like to answer as we go?
No, I think you covered all grounds. I'm actually happy and grateful that you selected me.
Well, it was everybody saying interview Menka. Right? So
you're very nice, thank you.
Yeah. So it was, you got a really good reputation, and I think there's a lot of people who speak very highly of you. A lot of people that I know that have brought your name up. So absolute pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure here too.
I'm sure there's a lot of other questions we could have asked, but I think we can do that for part 2, right? So thank you very much, Menka, for coming down. And listen, if anybody wants to reach out to you, are you okay for them to reach out to you? We'll leave your name, email address, or something at the bottom
I would
for
love
them
that.
to do that. And also the amazing the amazing fund manager from Chris Capital, right? I mean, you could put down the link there, so if anybody wants to look and research on on that particular GP and Ashish, right? The founder. And if you want to learn a little bit more about how fundraising is done, and you want to ask, the lady herself, she's always available, as are all our other guests that have been on the show. If you need to be in contact with any of them, please get in touch with us. Thank you very much. This is Ayaz Ahmed, your host for the Fundraisers Podcast. Over and out.